The body of a man was found here in June 1921. He was brutally murdered. The man was Charles J. Daly, a volunteer with the Irish Republican Army. He was shot 3 times, twice in the head, once into the side of the skull, which had an exit wound on the other side, once straight down from the top of the head, where there was no exit wound, and once under the front of his chest in towards his heart. The wounds were particular because the hair was burnt on the skin, on his face and on his top of his head, and his shirt was burned. So these wounds were inflicted at point blank range. The man was brutalised and tortured before he was executed. His body had 6 bayonet wounds in his back and below in his trousers. The bayonets weren't run through fully, but they were inflicted not to kill but to inflict pain and torment on this defenceless man who was a prisoner of Crown forces at that time. His body was also, when relatives and undertakers had him to wash his body was full of bruises from head halfway down his calves. He was black and blue. His skull bones were caved in, his jaw was broken, his arm was broken in 2 places, between the shoulder and elbow and below the elbow. His fingers were broken, ribs were broken on either side. The man was viciously, brutally assaulted. Charles J. Daly was a volunteer who fought for the Irish Republic. His body was found in these wounds here and Vernon Mount in 1921, and there's no memorial in Cork City to commemorate this volunteer. His body is interred in the Republican plot, which is fitting, at St Finbarr Cemetery. Tony, you're a member of the Cork Fenian Society, who have been remembering the deaths of all the volunteers, men and women, whose lives were taken during the fight for freedom over the past number of years and continuing, Tony. What do you know of this man?
As you say, he was absolutely brutally murdered. He had been a former hunger striker as well.
Yes.
He had been on hunger strike, and he was arrested the night that Leo Murphy was shot dead.
Where had he been?
He had been at a brigade meeting. He was on active service when he was arrested, so therefore he was a prisoner of war, and the British government again are guilty of mistreating prisoners and violating any
norms of war.
Yeah, and
the agreed rules of war according to Geneva.
Yeah, which would have been before the Geneva Convention. It would have been the Hague Convention.
The Hague Convention, yes.
Yeah, yet again not held accountable.
So you mentioned Leo Murphy, who was, of course, a battalion and a column commander in Cork, and I think Charles Daly was his adjutant.
He was.
And they were attending a staff meeting of the Republican Army out at Waterfall.
Yes.
on the night that Leo Murphy was himself killed.
Yes.
And Charles escaped for a time, but was arrested and taken to Victoria Barracks,
Yes.
which is now Collins Barracks at the top of Cork City. So he was a prisoner.
Yes, he was a prisoner of war. He had been, as I say, he had been on active service.
So how did a prisoner end up here in Vernon Woods?
So badly beaten that he was practically unrecognisable, with several bullet holes and bayonet wounds in him.
Yeah, as you say, Charles Daly had previously been arrested in Ash Hall in the centre of the city, which was the Republican headquarters at the time. And he had taken, I think, nearly a 2-week hunger strike.
He was.
In Mountjoy.
Yes, he was released after that, and he was recovering when he was at the staff meeting in Watergrass Hill, and it was surrounded by Crown forces, and in the ensuing melee, shall we say. As I say, Leo Murphy was killed, but Charles Daly got away and was arrested sometime later.
So reports at the time tell us that Charles Daly was amongst the most wanted men in Ireland. He had engaged in countless actions against Crown forces in Ireland, was a very active volunteer, a young man, he was 30 years of age when he was so viciously murdered. Now we're here, not if you like to give a history lesson, but to call on the people of Cork. He was one of our own. He lived not far from here. You can probably see his house on the back Douglas Road from here. He was one of our own who gave his all as a young man for a greater cause, for the cause of the common interest of the whole people of Ireland, to defend the Republic, which had been established at that time. It was a reality.
Yes, the Republic was a reality. And not only was he an active volunteer, and a very active volunteer at that, but he was also an elected representative of the people.
He was indeed, yes, as many of the volunteers then were. So we're in Vernon Mount here. It's a site, we'll put this picture of the house, Vernon Mount House, now burnt down some years ago, was set fire to. This is the house of an old Anglo-Irish family who have very, very checkered history of abuse of the local population and of women in particular. They ended up abandoning the estate, and it's been used for a variety of purposes. But below us here in the backdrop to the video, you can probably see the construction of a new bridge going from Vernon Woods here across to the new Tramore Park as an amenity for the people of Cork, which is excellent. Well done, Cork City Council. And Cork City Council, now in their great wisdom, have asked members of the public to suggest how we might name this bridge. And there's a variety of names going out there, not knocking any of them, but I don't think any of them could be more worthy than let's finally have a memorial that we might remember Charles J. Daly, whose life was so viciously taken and his body thrown in these woods here, that this bridge should be named after him. That I propose. I ask people of Cork, I appeal to the members of Cork City Council, would they please respect our own and do this thing, name this bridge in honour and respect of Volunteer Daly. Members of the public are able to add their names to this consultation. You should visit the Cork City Council website, which is corkcity.ie. We'll put an active link up in the comments to this video. It's consult.corkcity.ie, I think. There's regular public consultations. Now, public consultations, of course, aren't obligatory to be followed by the council, but they certainly will give an indicator of public opinion. So let's make our opinion known. Let's honour this volunteer. What do you think the Cork Fenian Society would say, Tony?
Cork Fenian Society would be absolutely delighted if City Council took this opportunity to remember a very, very great volunteer.
Yeah. Tony, I can't help you. You have a picture in your hand. Maybe the camera can focus on this image. This is a mass card for Charles J. Daly, a volunteer killed by Crown Forces, it says, on the 29th of June 1921, aged 30 years of age. May he rest in peace, and may his memory live on, that Cork City should honour him and respect him for the man that he was and for the deed that he did.
For the many deeds he did.
The many deeds he did.